Hey everyone, how are you today? Welcome to Get Ready With Me and Talk About Stuff. And I did not turn on my light. I'm like, why does it look so dark? Now we know. Huh, look at that. What a difference that makes. Anyway, now that all the lights are on, welcome to the show. My name is Stephanie, and this is, as I mentioned, Get Ready With Me and Talk About Stuff. And today we are going to cover a topic that I hope will be encouraging to you. I hope it will be inspiring to you, and I hope it will comfort you. How was your week? I meant to do an episode last week, but time got away from me. I'm working on reorganizing my room where I do my art, and it did not go as planned. Some of my shelves, so I live in Michigan, some of my shelves were delivered to South Carolina. Thanks, FedEx. And that really brought everything to a halt, and that was just really not fun to deal with. But I think I'm going to be able to finish it tomorrow because Amazon was very quick to send me a different set of shelves and refund my money for the first set. So all is well, and I'm hoping that this week I can finish that up. Now I should tell you, this episode is going to cover some things that, if you've been in any sort of a weather-related disaster, it may be uncomfortable for you. You know, if you've still got some lingering trauma related to that. So that's just something to think about as we go forward, because I really don't want that to catch anyone by surprise and then they end up having, you know, PTSD from watching my video. That is not what we're going for here. I've got the driest nose today. There we go. Oh, man. Sorry. I'll have to sanitize my hands. Anyway, so yes, today we're going to cover the butterfly people. Now, to give a little bit of background before we get into what these things are and what it's all about, it's important to know a couple things. So on May 22nd of 2011, there was an F5 tornado that swept through Joplin, Missouri. This tornado, I remember this. I remember hearing about it on the news when it happened. This tornado, by the time it was finished, it ended up cutting a swath of destruction about a mile wide. It killed 161 people, injured countless more, and caused billions of dollars worth of damage. It actually ended up leveling about a third of Joplin when everything was said and done. So this was a massive, massive storm. And if I remember correctly, now obviously I wasn't there, like I said, I live in Michigan, but I remember hearing about it on the news, and if I remember correctly, this storm gathered speed and ferocity very quickly. It wasn't like there was a ton. I mean, with tornadoes, there's not always a ton of warning anyway. But this monster of a storm just kind of came up out of nowhere. People had no real time to prepare or anything. I mean, it was just like, there it is, and it's going to destroy our town. So while this was happening, obviously there were people going about their business, carrying on with their day. And then this storm swept through. As I said, leveled much of Joplin and really, literally and figuratively turned people's lives upside down. Now, as they began to, as survivors and first responders and so forth began to respond to the storm and assess the damage, stories started coming out about these entities, I guess, that people referred to as butterfly people. One of the stories involved a mother and her preschool-age daughter. They were in the car when the storm came sweeping toward them, and they were trying to get away from it because obviously they wanted to survive this thing, so they couldn't, just sit there and hope for the best. They tried to get away. They fell to the ground as they were running away. They were in their car. They got out. They ran. They fell to the ground as they were running. And the mother did everything she could to try to shield her daughter from the debris and everything flying around them. And the tornado actually picked up their car. And I'm sorry, my nose is really, really itchy. I'm sorry. It actually picked up their car and like basically hurled the car in their direction. And the mother's shielding her daughter and bracing for impact, but the impact never happened. Well, when it was safe to get up, you know, the mother's obviously confused, but just glad to be alive. When it was safe to get up, they got up and the little girl says to her mom, did you think they were pretty? And the mother's confused and said, who? You know, who is pretty? And the little girl says, Mommy, didn't you see the butterfly people? And goes on to explain how she saw these butterfly people hovering around them, and also saw these butterfly people actually carrying people up into the sky. Another account involves a man with 2 young boys. They were trapped outside when the storm hit. They really couldn't get into any safe shelter. The force of the winds was so powerful that it said, you know, in some versions of the story, the soles of the man's shoes are actually torn off his shoes. That's how strong the winds were. Now, I only know about tornadoes from watching movies like Twister or, you know, The Wizard of Oz. So it's hard for me to grasp how powerful winds would have to be to make something like that happen. But I have heard stories about things like that happening. So, you know, it is possible for winds to be that strong. It's hard, like I said, for somebody from northern Michigan to put that into perspective. But I'm trying to imagine how terrifying that would feel to be trapped in something, you know, a storm like that. And there's nothing you can do but, you know, wait and hope for the best. So as they are, you know, they're on the ground, they're hoping for the best. You know, I'm sure that, I didn't read a lot of details about it, but I am sure that this man was doing what he could to protect these boys. And, you know, the wind is whipping around them. I'm sure there's debris flying through the air. I'm sure the sound must have been something otherworldly. I cannot really imagine what that must have sounded like, and knowing that there's nowhere that they can go. There's nothing they can do. They just have to hope for the best. Well, they walked away unscathed. And once again, one of the children, these boys were preschool age, said that he saw butterfly people around them while the storm was swirling around them. And the boy believed that these butterfly people were there to protect them. Another account involves a mother and her, I think there were 5 children involved in this one. So the mother and her children, if I'm understanding correctly, the mother had been out, so the children had been home, and the children ranged in ages from like teenage down to like, I think it was 6 or 7. So the mother was out doing something, the older kids were looking after the younger kids. So the storm hits, mother gets home, hurries into the house, hurries her children toward the one area of the house they have for shelter, which is a small walk-in closet. And I actually heard about this story on Monsters and Mysteries in America, which was where I first heard about these butterfly people. And according to the account I heard, so the mother and her children are in this closet. They are praying for protection, and they are listening as the full force of this storm descends on their house and just tears it apart piece by piece. The storm ends up tearing off the roof. Man, what is on me? I fixed something for one of the little kids, my little nephew, and I think I got like dust or something. I don't know. But anyway, doesn't matter. Anyway, so the force of the winds was so strong that it actually ended up shattering the glasses of this woman's daughter. The family thinks this is it. We're going to die. There is no hope for us. Well, just as they start, you know, making as much peace as one can with the notion that they're going to die in a few minutes, the youngest boy sees what he would later describe as a white woman, and I think by that he means like a glowing white, entity of some kind. And this entity that he saw had wings, and he saw this entity hovering over them, spreading out its wings in sort of a protective way. And this whatever it was, stayed there, hovering over the family, protecting them, shielding them during as the storm swept through and tore everything apart. The family emerged from that closet relatively unharmed. I'm sure that there were, a few bumps and bruises, but when you're comparing losing your life to having a few bumps and bruises, I would still call that unharmed. So they emerge from this closet and they look around and they realize the closet is literally all that is left of their house. Everything else has been leveled, and they look around, everything in their neighborhood has been leveled. There is nothing left. But somehow this closet that they were in withstood the force of the storm, and they were protected. They were safe. There was nothing, special about the structure of this closet. It was never designed to be a storm shelter. It was just the closet. That's the only place they had to go. And it was the only thing to survive the storm. Another account. Now this account is not about a direct sighting or an immediate sighting of these butterfly people, but it is related. So in this account, a young girl named Emily, who was 14 at the time of the storm, she was out with her mom. They were driving across town when the storm hit. The storm was so strong, it actually picked up their car, and they were airborne for several hundred yards before the car was finally just dropped. And upon impact, Emily's leg was impaled, which led to several weeks of healing and recovery, and I would imagine, physical therapy and so forth. Well, in the weeks that followed, Emily would go back to her neighborhood and just start walking through the rubble, as so many people did, and just looking at what was left. There was nothing left. Her house was gone. Her neighborhood was gone. There was nothing there but piles and piles and piles of rubble. And there was just nothing left. As she was walking through this devastation, though, she says that butterflies started coming out of nowhere and hovering around her. They would circle around her, they would land on her and just sit there for a while. And it's important to note, there were no trees, there were no flowers, there was nothing that would naturally attract the butterflies to this space. Yet, as she walked through the wreckage, butterflies were all around her. She took this as meaning that these, her interpretation was that these were angels, and that they were letting her know that they had not left, and they were still there looking out for these people and protecting them. Seeing them through the aftermath of this horrible trauma they had just endured. Now, I wondered if there had been other sightings of similar things anywhere else, because the way these creatures, I guess creatures, would they be called creatures? Entities? Whatever. The way these things are described is that these are humanoid creatures that have bright, colorful wings, and that's actually how they earned the nickname of the butterfly people, because of their brightly colored wings. And they showed up in the midst of a horrific situation, and were seen by everyone who saw them felt that their presence was meant to be calming and also protective. Most of the witnesses to this were children. However, there were some adults who saw this happening and were just as blown away by it as the kids were. This is not the eyeshadow I want to wear today. I didn't plan this. I don't really plan my eye makeup and stuff before I start. And then I get started and I'm like, you know, maybe I don't want to do that. So, quick palette change, and here we go. These stories started coming out in like the trauma centers as people were waiting for food and water and maybe clothing and so forth at these trauma response centers. And as these stories started coming out, it became very clear that many people had seen these, not just children, though it was primarily children. And all of their stories were being reported independently to nurses and other care providers. And they were all eerily similar, all describing the same thing. This winged entity with brightly colored wings was there, and it helped the person who saw them feel calm and feel safe. So, as I mentioned, I wondered if this sort of thing had happened at any other time. Like, is this unique to Joplin, or has something like this been reported previously? There are some instances of winged creatures being seen before disasters, such as in 1986 in Chernobyl. There are people who reported that they saw winged creatures hovering over the nuclear reactor just before the disaster. There are people who reported in 2001 that just before the first plane struck the World Trade Center, they saw winged creatures hovering around the area. So in those instances, the people who witnessed them after the fact came to believe that those creatures were there to provide warning, which, okay, I mean, I guess, you know, if you didn't know it was a warning at the time, though, that seems remarkably ineffective. But okay, winged creatures. They were there to provide warning of an impending disaster. I couldn't find any other instances of these particular type of creatures showing up during the disaster. Now, I also thought of Mothman, who did show up at the Silver Bridge in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. There are people who reported seeing it hovering above the bridge just before the bridge collapsed. Now, I think the difference in these situations, though, is in the case of Mothman, people actually feared him. They knew of him before the disaster, and the people who had seen Mothman, they were terrified by him. Whatever it was that, whatever this creature was or is, the people who have witnessed it were scared, as opposed to the butterfly people who gave those who witnessed them a sense of comfort. So I think there is a distinct difference in the source of these entities and their purpose. Now, I also started thinking, Joplin, Missouri, that's Bible Belt country. Is it possible that these people were just, imagining what they saw, that they were just trying to process a trauma, and, their brain, defaulted to stories they'd heard at church or Sunday school, and, manufactured these visions to just help them cope with what was happening? I would, after thinking about this and reading some of the accounts, I think that's a lazy answer. And I have seen some people, as I was researching this, there are some people who think that it's just the brain defaulting to imagery that it recognized from, Bible stories or whatever. I think that's lazy. And the reason I think that's lazy is because not everybody who hears a Bible story, number one, is going to be receptive to it. Not everybody who hears it is going to see it as a source of comfort. And that so many people reported the exact same thing. These weren't things that were like, it was something with wings. I mean, they were very detailed in how these things presented. They were colorful wings. They were stretched out protectively. They were carrying people up to the skies. Maybe it was the souls of those who had not survived the storm. I don't know. But the descriptions were so similar that I don't think it's something that would come just from, an individual's interpretation of a Bible story that they heard. That's just my opinion. I am by no means an expert on this. But I also think it's worth noting that nobody, or most people did not refer to these creatures as angels. And it seems to me that if they were simply defaulting to what they knew from a Bible story that they'd heard at Sunday school or in church, they would have called these things angels, not butterfly people, because the Bible doesn't really make mention of butterfly people. It makes mention of angels. It makes mentions of cherubim and seraphim. It does not say anything about butterfly people. So the fact that there was a distinction made in that, they were not called angels, to me that speaks to, no, this was something more than simply repeating a story that they'd heard. So what are they? Well, that I don't know. I think it is something that is very much subject to individual interpretation. What I do know is it doesn't really matter if you believe these things are possible or not. It doesn't matter if you want to call it an angel or not. It doesn't matter, because what matters is these people experienced something. And I am a big believer in respecting people's lived experiences. And it's not my place to say, well, I don't think that's possible, therefore you could not have experienced that. I think we see that happening in a lot of areas when people report a personal experience. And, I always wonder when someone does that, who are any of us to dismiss someone else's lived experience? That's not our place. We can't do that. We can't tell somebody that is not what happened to you. Yes, I mean, it's just not within our it's just not right for any of us to look at somebody who is sharing something they experienced and telling them, nah, that didn't happen. Now, does that mean that everyone who shares an experience of this sort actually did have that happen? Not necessarily. Some people might be, as mentioned when I talked about Dogman, certainly some people will share that they've experienced something like this because they want to be part of something. They want to be, seen as, part of something big that's happening around them, and they just want to be included. I mean, certainly there are people who will say they experienced something, just so they can be part of what they see is an important moment, okay? Like in the instances of Dogman sightings, certainly there are some people who hoaxed an experience, perhaps even going so far as to manufacture evidence, but that does not mean that everyone who reported sightings of these butterfly people made it up. In fact, years later, so this happened in 2011, it's now 2022, many of the witnesses who reported that back in the day, they stand by what they saw. Now, some of them reported that it was an actual entity that they saw. It was a physical being of some kind. Some reported it was simply light that they saw that apparently took on the shape of this butterfly person. And some recalled that it was just a feeling that they had, that very suddenly they felt peace and calm over what was happening around them, even though, their world is literally being torn apart. So whatever these things are, it seems evident to me that in some sense they are real. Now, if you watched my channel or spoken with me on social media or anything for any length of time, you know that I tend to be skeptical of experiences people have with things that cannot be validated and verified and so forth. But I am also someone who believes that there are so many things that we just don't know. So many things about this universe that we have not been able to explain yet. Who's to say that these butterfly people aren't there somewhere. And who's to say that, you know, we don't have some role in manifesting them just when we need them. I just think it would be profoundly arrogant for anyone to claim that these things cannot be true because we don't have verifiable physical evidence of their truth. Now, that is not the same thing as, you know, saying a religious belief of any kind is true and is gonna, you know, it's a concrete truth, and if you don't believe it, you're going to hell. That's not the same thing. This is I'm simply saying we have to respect someone's lived experience. It's not anyone's place to tell them that, you know, they didn't experience what they very clearly did experience. I don't know. What do you think? I'm going to pause and finish this up so I don't just ramble on. And then when I get back, I'll just have a few final thoughts and then maybe a couple questions for you. I'll be right back. All right, I am back. I have to tell you, before I carry on with this, I found the coolest pigmented eyeshadow, or I guess pigments you can use on anything, but I use them on my eyes. It's Lorena Cosmetics, and they are so cool. They're like color shifting, and I have been obsessed with putting this green right in the corner of my eye and kind of blending it in because it just looks so cool. I don't know if you can see it. Anyway, so back to the topic at hand. So my thoughts on the butterfly people are this. As I said, in a literal, you know, as I said, you remember when I said that? In a literal physical sense, I don't know if these things are real or not. I don't know if there are actually butterfly people showing up for you know, in people's dire situations and in it, like as far as having a physical body there. I don't know. What I do know is these people saw something. We don't discount lived experiences. Whatever these things are, whether they're a spiritual apparition or just a feeling or an actual physical being that manifests and then returns to wherever it came from, we know that it comforted people. It made them feel safe. It probably, you know, because they were comforted and felt safe, probably helped them make better decisions to protect their own safety than they would have made had they been in a state of panic. And we also know that after these events in Joplin, that the stories about the butterfly people and the fact that so many people had seen them and so many people were sharing these stories, it also helped unite a community after a very traumatic event. So many people lost everything in this tornado. As I mentioned, I gotta stop touching my nose. A third of Joplin, Missouri was leveled by this tornado. So for something to bring people together like that, whether it's something that we can prove or not, it's real. It is real in the sense that they experienced it, and that is real enough, okay? And I also think it's different because I have seen posts after storms. I'm not going to touch my nose. I've got to stop. I was upstairs. See what happened? I'm going to do a sidebar here so you know why I'm doing this and why I'm so kind of out of sorts today. So I was upstairs with my parents. We rent from them. And I mean, my nose gets so itchy when I go up there. And one of my little nephew needed help with something, and the cord I had to get to plug in the thing that needed to be plugged in was, you know, like behind the couch. You know how it gets dusty behind a couch sometimes, and now I'm all sniffly. But I'm really trying hard not to touch my nose, so bear with me. Anyway, I have seen images after like a storm or sometimes even a fire of like Bibles, for example, that were unharmed. And people have used that to say, you know, God is real, you need to believe this or you need to believe that, or your eternal destination is to, you know, rot in hell forever or be burned in fire forever, whichever you prefer. I didn't see that happening with this story, which tells me, now granted, this was in 2011 where we didn't have the ubiquitous social media that we do now. But the fact that this story still has not been widely used to try to shame or guilt or frighten people into a specific belief system indicates to me that whatever these things were, they were meant for everyone. They were meant to be a source of comfort and protection during and after the events for anyone who found them to be comforting. And that, you know, I think that's beautiful. I think that's what made this story really stand out for me, because this isn't, you know, when I see things on social media about, oh my gosh, the Bibles were unharmed, that means God is real and you need to repent today. I mean, I join the chorus of people explaining why those Bibles were unharmed and there's nothing supernatural about it. But this is something different because it feels different. The response to it was different. The way people used the story was different. This story, like I said, brought people together. It comforted them. It gave them hope. And this story also inspired art. And I am a firm believer that art saves the world over and over and over again. And the fact that this inspired people to, you know, tap into a part of themselves that maybe they hadn't before, or maybe they were reluctant to before. To me, that says whatever these things were, they were there for a far greater good than simply protecting, you know, books in a church or, you know, trying to scare people into heaven. And that's why I really like the story, because it just feels like it really is meant for everyone. Now, my own butterfly story, now I've never seen a butterfly person, but when I was going through cancer treatments, it was not at all uncommon when I was outside sitting in the garden, you know, that was all I had the strength to do sometimes, was just walk out and sit in the garden. Butterflies would land on me frequently and just hang out there. It's like they were just letting me know they were there. And it was comforting. There might very well be a rational explanation for why they would do that. But at the time, it comforted me and it gave me hope. And that alone was reason enough for me to believe that for whatever reasons they were landing on me, at least part of that was to comfort me and to give me hope and to let me know everything was going to be okay. And it was. Everything was okay. Life changed dramatically. Life has not been the same since. My health was permanently altered, but I'm still here. And I feel more alive now than I have at any time before, because when you go through things like that, it changes your perspective and it gives you an appreciation for things that you might not have had if you had not experienced something that showed you how quickly everything can be taken away. So, what are your experiences? If you were there during the storm, did you see these butterfly people? I welcome respectful, you know, dialogue about this. If this is something that you don't think is legitimate, something that you don't think could possibly happen, you can respectfully share your thoughts on that. I will delete disrespectful comments. I am not giving a platform anymore to people who just are here to bash other people, whether it's me or someone else commenting. I'm just not going to do that. You know, it's okay if you just, you know, if you don't like my video and you want to respectfully tell me why, but I don't want people coming here leaving incendiary comments just because you can do it behind the anonymity of a keyboard or a screen, you know. So anyway, I would really love to know your thoughts. If there's something else you'd like me to cover on these videos, please let me know. You know, like I mentioned earlier this year as in last week, my direction for my videos is going to be a little bit different going forward. I just think we're in a time when people need to hear more hopeful things, more interesting things. You know, the world is on fire. We know that. There is so much happening in the world right now that gives people cause for anxiety. I don't want to contribute to that. And so I'm looking for topics that will kind of give us all a little bit of a break when you listen to my video or watch my video. That it can be something that you just enjoy. It makes the world feel a little less on fire for a little bit. Anyway, I hope you're doing well. Please take care of yourself. Take care of each other. I know it's hard right now. I know everybody's feeling overwhelmed, but we're going to be okay. Eventually. All right. Be good to yourself. Be good to each other. Don't shit on yourself or anyone else. And I will see you again next time. Bye.